All right, good morning, everyone. This is Lieutenant Colonel Matt Altman, Chair of the SAME Young Member Council. I'd really like to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today. We're really excited for this Young Member Council Professional Development call with retired Vice Admiral John Cotton, and just glad that you could join us. I wanted to send special thanks to our Young Member Council Programs team, Madhu Carey and Jeff DeGid, for putting together the call today, and thanks everyone for bearing with us from our shift from GoToMeeting to WebEx to accommodate the overwhelming interest. Again, just really excited and encouraged with the great interest in this call. A few administrative notes. Once Admiral Cotton gets started today, I'd encourage everyone to actively participate in the discussion using the Q&A window on the right side of your screen, and that can be throughout the call, and at the end we'll do a formal Q&A as well. So if you have questions, comments, or thoughts throughout the discussion, please feel free to send them using the chat, and it'll help us all build a more robust discussion. You'll see Admiral Cotton likes to use lots of different images and charts. He's used to dealing with fighter pilots, so he uses lots of pictures. But hopefully with his words and with everybody's question and answers and discussion, it'll be a nice, robust discussion. Jeff DeGid is also going to send out a survey to all participants following the call, so we'd really appreciate your feedback on that survey so we can get a better idea of who's on the call and better yet how to enhance our professional development program and all of our Young Member Council offerings in the future. And finally, final administrative note, I just want to invite everyone to join in our monthly Young Member Council call. It's every second Thursday of the month, so our next one is next Thursday at 12 o'clock. We keep it strict to a half hour, and really just this opportunity to provide information on all the events and opportunities across all of SAME for all young members. So everyone's welcome to join, and our information for that call will be on our LinkedIn site. So without further ado, it's really my honor to introduce Vice Admiral retired John Cotton. He's a graduate from the U.S. Naval Academy with a Bachelor of Science degree in Aerospace Engineering, and then he earned his Naval Aviator wings, his wings of gold, and became a third-generation pilot. Admiral Cotton's father was also a naval aviator, and his grandfather flew with the Lafayette Flying Corps in World War I. He's actually accumulated over 15,000 flight hours as a Navy and commercial airline pilot, and his global joint experience includes assignments as a light attack, reconnaissance, strike fighter, and an adversary pilot, and command leadership positions of an FA-18 squadron, Naval Air Station Keflavik in Iceland, and the Pentagon Navy Command Center. He most recently served in the Pentagon as Chief of Navy Reserve and Commander Navy Reserve Force, and then worked for DRS Technologies as the Corporate Senior Vice President. Admiral Cotton currently serves as a member of the Secretary of Defense Reserve Forces Policy Board, a senior fellow at the Joint Forces Staff College, where I had the pleasure of meeting him this summer, an executive MBA adjunct faculty member at George Mason University School of Business, and as an emeritus volunteer trustee at the Vincent Hall Navy Marine Coast Guard Residence Foundation. So again, I had the pleasure of meeting Admiral Cotton this summer when I attended Joint Forces Staff College, and for those of you that aren't familiar with that, that's a requirement for all military officers to become joint qualified. And Admiral Cotton gives us his time to mentor joint officers at every course that comes through, and we had a few hours to discuss with him to current events, global trends, and basically leadership in the military and beyond today. Really engaging discussion, and he really does encourage everyone to participate in the discussion. It really makes for a nice broad discussion. So please use that Q&A box. I hope everyone enjoys this discussion with Admiral Cotton. And sir, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time and your mentorship and your leadership. So without further ado, Admiral Cotton.
Thanks very much. I appreciate the great intro. Can everyone believe that it's December 1st? I woke up this morning and I was already feeling behind on all my Christmas chores. At least the tree's up and the lights are on out front, and I'll get to the shopping here eventually. So today's purpose is really to answer your questions. So if you have anything at the top of your head before we start, please just put it in the text box, and I'll be monitoring that while I yak at you guys. From the title slide here, you can see I just want to make you think. I'm an old guy. I've done a lot of things, but I try to listen and learn even more. I'm more of a student than ever. But one of my favorite quotes is that old people believe everything, middle-aged people suspect everything, like Matt, and young people know everything, like some of you out in the audience. I'm so old that I barely remember knowing everything. So these are things to try to make you think about what's going on. Let's do this and advance advance the slide. The key thing to do here, keys don't work. So does the monitor know how to advance our slides? On the keyboard, there we go. All right, if you'll see on the first slide I showed for you, I always like to have a current topic, and that's the recount that's going on in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. In the news is the Green Party challenging, and we'll see what happens. December 19th is probably when we'll know the results of the recounts. If the recounts aren't complete for any reason, those electoral votes will not be awarded. So if you look at Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, the total adds up to 46. And if you took that total away from Trump, he'd have 260. Clinton would still have 232. So the worst case possible right now, someone would not have 270, and the president will be selected by the House of Representatives, and the vice president would be selected by the Senate. This has only happened once in our history, great civics lesson. I personally don't think that's going to happen. The recounts will probably go through and might find a few things, but not enough to change the results, and maybe in one state, but not in all three. But we'll see. It's a great, like I said, a great lesson in civics. If you look at the results of the election, I found a couple slides for you to look at. Blue being Democrat, red being Republican. This is our country based on population, and you can show those coastal states, how many people live there, in Illinois especially. Another way to look at it is in the county level results. And you can see where the cities are in blue for the most part, and the countryside is in the red for the most part. Another way to look at this is half of our country now is living in those blue cities, and the rest is the countryside. So it's an interesting, if you go back and forth here, just a comparison of where we live and how we vote. Another way to look at this is cartoon somebody did, why we have an electoral college. If we didn't have one, this would be the impact of those big four states on the results of the election. And we go through this every 48 years when we get close to looking at the electoral college. Obviously, the last time was 2000, and again here in 2016, our founding fathers really knew what they were doing, I believe. One little thing I want to tell you, too, is the original Constitution, the senators were appointed by the states, were not elected. That was changed by an amendment, how we do it today. So that's curious also. I like this because General George S. Patton is a personal hero. If you haven't read the book by Bill O'Reilly, Killing Patton, I recommend it. But if General Patton was alive today, this is probably what he would say: Trump, you magnificent bastard. What's going to happen in the first 100 days? Well, you've seen the president-elect openly interviewing in Trump Tower and on the road. I guess he's going to Indiana today. And from his contract with voters, if you Google Trump contract with voters, it's a nice 2-page document. You can download a PDF and read it. This is taken from that. And this is what the first 100 days will probably look like. And the appointees that he's nominating are going to adhere to this, because I think for what I hear inside, I call it the ring around confusion, or the beltway around D.C., this is where we are. I'm going to pause right now to make sure everybody can hear me okay, and if there's any questions, you can type those in. Matt, I see you're still muted, but can you hear me okay?
Sir, I can hear you loud and clear, and I can see the slides and the progression through the slides perfectly. If anybody isn't hearing the Admiral or seeing it, just type it in the Q&A window, and we'll draw attention to it at that point.
Anyway, back to the first 100 days agenda. No real surprises here. These were all talked about during the election. I'm not going to read them to you. You can read them, but they're on there. If you'd like these PowerPoint slides in PPT format, just email Jeff or Matt or anybody at headquarters that can send it to you. I think it's in PDF format that you can download from the WebEx. But you're welcome to have these PowerPoint slides. Please use them. I recommend some of you parents show a couple of them to your know-it-all teenagers. It might enhance their lives a little bit. I want you to look for a minute at this nighttime shot of our planet Earth. And if we were an interactive audience, I'd be asking for you what you think is the dominant color on that chart and get your various answers. But since we're not interactive here, I just want to post out, let's see, the chat boxes you want me to minimize. How's that? I put the chat down here. That might be better. So anyway, looking at planet Earth, 70% of the Earth is dark because it's water. And if you'll notice, about 80% of the world's population lives within 300 kilometers of that water. And the trade of our world goes by water about 90%. The population concentration is within 30 degrees latitude of the equator. That's where the warm parts of the Earth are. And you can also see the affluence or the haves, where the brightest lights are, and of course the have-nots. And we'll talk a lot about the have-nots here because they're trying to get to the haves. Also, in those concentrations of have-nots, there's larger birth rates, and those people are trying to get to the lights in the darker spots where a lot of terrorists are, and they're also trying to get to those lights. And unfortunately, some of them are trying to turn out the lights and do harm to the people living in those cities. So that kind of sums up where we find ourselves on planet Earth. Let's go to the next slide here. Here we go. Earlier this year, Chapman University released a poll. It's a pretty extensive poll of the country. And what are we worried about? This was in January. And you can see the election theme came out at #1. And if you look across, brown, corruption of government officials, gun control, and the Affordable Health Care Act were the top 3 from a government perspective. You can see government, illness and death, man-made disasters, crime, and economic. And these are what really concern Americans. Crime really isn't on there. We're pretty safe at home. We do fear a little bit of terrorism. Maybe identity theft online is rising right now. But the #2 is the terrorist attack on nation. You know, most of my life, the biggest threat was the Soviet Union or nuclear war. But now we really are worried about a terrorist act on our nation. #3 is the personal fear of inadequate funds for the future. And I'll tell you, from a government perspective, that's what's going to be also in our future. And the terrorism victim is also important. Let's go see how that plays out. This lady here is obviously an immigrant, and she's saying open the borders. Borders will continue to be an issue for us in the future, and we're just not the only one that are building walls. I'm going to see if this works here live. It'll repeat. This shows the birth rate from 1950 projected into the future. You can see the Western world, developed world, stops having babies, and the baby factory of the world is Africa. This is according to the UN, and you can see where many, many immigrants in the future are going to come from Africa. In fact, if the birth rate gets so low, we're going to welcome people that want to work from Africa. So a lot of our immigration procedures, the way we vet, the way we have people come into our country is going to have to change for the future. I just think about all the things that this slide means. So we're worried about overpopulation, and here we are worried about birth rate in many nations now, including the good old USA. Probably the oldest country on the planet is Japan. Europe's not far behind. We're pretty lucky here in the United States. Our average age is about 37 or 38, and our birth rate is pretty well sustaining. These are the borders that are being built around the world in green or already built in red. So it's not just the United States talking about the southern border. Israel, of course, has some pretty effective walls. And look at that wall that Mexico has on its southern border. It's pretty effective for them. So that's just curious for you to look at other walls going up around the world. Here's a close-up of Europe. And again, you look at the lights are the haves and the darkness is the have-nots. Up there in upper right is Battlestar Moscow. And Moscow controls the natural gas, oil for Europe, controls the heat for Europe. Look how bright it is around London right here. I was in London 2 years ago and talking business with some folks, and they say that 75% of all business in England goes on within a 1-hour drive of London right there. Huge economic center. And again, you've got have-nots down here in Africa and over here in the Middle East, and they're coming up in many, many ways to get to Europe to not only get benefits, but to find work. And here's a good chart that shows you where people are going. And you can see it's primarily Germany. As Germany's economy is stronger, there's jobs available, and of course we know the results of some of those inner city concentrations of immigrants and the crime that's coming as a result. Here's a picture of North America. I'm not going to say USA because in that picture there's at least 4 countries. You've got the flags at the top. And again, you've got people that are have-nots coming down here from the south primarily, coming across our border at some key crossing points. And getting to these city centers, you can see right here. You can also see just how undeveloped the West is and how much more room we have, and how there is no border here with Canada. It's just people staying close to where it's a little bit warmer. Again, bad guys trying to get here to turn the lights out, which is why Homeland Security has become so much more important for us. Why are people coming to our country? Look at how well off we are. These are equivalent GDPs of countries. Look at France is equivalent to California, Canada just to Texas, Minnesota is Norway, just the state of New York is South Korea. We are so well off. We have so much to be thankful for here, and this is why people want to come to America. I'll let you look at the rest of that later. A couple good quotes to think about. These are the only ones I have in the presentation. But a couple of smart men, Bob Gates and Mike Mullen, that we like to look at the future and be prepared for it, but we don't do a very good job. As George Will says, the future has a way of arriving unannounced down there at the bottom. And I'll move the box so you can see that. And Mike Mullen, we all thought he'd get fired as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff when he had the gall to say, our national debt is the largest national security threat our nation faces. I would agree with him as it approaches $20 trillion today. So the Council on Foreign Relations put out this map earlier in the year, and they predicted where conflict would happen in our country this year. And believe it or not, it's in the developed nations. Who would have ever thought something like that would happen? It also kind of matches internet usage. I found this interesting. If you toggle back and forth, where the conflict is where more people are online, which explains why some people are radicalized online and cause issues, just like we had the young man do here recently. This is phenomenal in the population concentration around the world, why our government is switching toward a Western Pacific strategy. There are more people living inside the circle than outside of it. And if you redraw the map of the world, according to population and size of countries, you can see the population concentration of Indonesia, largest Muslim country in the world, India, and China. Lots of opportunity there. And you can see how small we are in comparison in the Western world. This is the flow of oil, not only the direction, but in the magnitude of oil. You can see a majority of the Middle East oil is going through the Straits of Malacca to China. And you can also see that some of us coming over to our places where we refine. This is very, very strategic picture because this flow of oil cannot be interrupted or you have economic stress. It's also a way to look at strategies so that you can avoid war. You can also go after people's logistics lines in case of conflict sometime. That's what the Department of Defense thinks about. This is in that South Pacific, or I should say Western Pacific region. It's so important to us now as so many countries are claiming different boundaries here. You can see what China claims in red compared to the other countries. And of course, there's petroleum resources under the water as well. And what's China doing about this, which is concerning us, is the building of bases on these small islands or coral atolls. They've been doing this for the last couple of years. These are the most recent pictures I've seen, and you can see how developed these bases are with white planform models of what kind of airplanes could be based there in the future. Will probably cause conflict in the future. North Korea is an issue for us. This is where they launch their missiles from. You hear that in the news. And this, unfortunately, is the range of those missiles. And you can see that the western part of the United States will be potentially targeted in the future. This worries not only Northern Command, but will occupy some of the time of our new Commander-in-Chief. And I will say that we do have interceptors based here in Alaska. They're on watch all the time. And we also have a guided missile destroyer right off the coast of North Korea all the time, just in case they do get to the point where they launch missiles to protect us. And hopefully those systems will work. I call this SIROC. Got this from the Institute of Study of War. I don't know anybody that's going to solve this. We're trying to help folks out, but you can just see the tribes. You can see the boundaries that we drew in 1919 that have caused problems for many years. Of course, there's oil there, and I think this will continue to be an issue as hopefully a stronger Iraq emerges. Syria, I don't know what's going to happen there. Poor people in Aleppo right now and the issues they're going through, but the new administration will be looking at this. I think as President-elect Trump looks at the nominees he's going to put into key security positions, this is one thing that he wants to stabilize pretty quickly. This is the economic center of gravity since the time of Jesus Christ. And you can see it was pretty stable until 1820 and then really took off to the west. Without looking at the slides, I would ask the class, in 1820, what was the biggest economy in the world, largest GDP? Since most of us were educated in the West, we would probably guess, you know, the British Empire would be the largest, and we would be wrong. And I'll show you the next slide. The Western world peaked in 1950, which remember was the start of Korea, probably as we went more into debt too. And now its center of gravity is heading back to kind of where it was. And this is a good sand chart, explains the size of economies over time. So you can see at 1820, we were a mere little country there. And you can see the largest economies in the world at that time were China and India. And over time, communism restricted them. We grew bigger. We peaked in 1950. We're still doing very well, but these are the other large economies of the world. And eventually, China will probably be number one again, just because of the number of people they have. So it wasn't Great Britain, obviously. They were big, but they weren't that big. This shows the economic health of countries around the world. Having 102% debt is probably not a good thing, but we're okay compared to other countries. The worst off country in the world is Japan at 230%. Greece is right behind. You can see those Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, southern Mediterranean countries are in tough trouble. Singapore's up there at 99. Russia's only 17%. So this is sustainability of debt is an issue for many countries in the world. It should concern us. However, our economy by far is the biggest of all the countries in the world. We're very, very lucky here, as I said before. These other countries with their debt service have a much tougher time with the debt that they carry. This is our budget. This is the top line every year. And you can see recently interest is going up a little bit. Our spending on entitlements, mandatory, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, if you combine those with interest on the debt, you can see that it's squeezing the discretionary spending. And of this amount of discretionary spending, the Department of Defense is about 60% of it. So the biggest bill payer when you need to go to discretionary funding is the Department of Defense. So I'll say, when a president-elect says you want to expand the Department of Defense, you have to ask yourself where that money is going to come from, because interest isn't going down. Our must-pays isn't going down, but you can change some assumptions about how much that's going to cost. The mandatory payments, I think, are going to increase because we've got so many people getting old like me, the boomer generation. In fact, there's 10,000 people turning 65 every single day and looking for their Social Security. So you can see that as Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid increase, hopefully interest rates won't increase too much. Our revenues won't be able to afford the debt, and that crossover line is in the early 2030s. This is according to OMB and CBO, which worries politicians all the time. This is a roller coaster chart, if you want, of our debt over the years and where we are today with the debt we owe to ourselves, debt held by the public, percentage of GDP. And you can see where we are in World War II, where we're projected to go, which is why we need to do something about our debt. We need to control our spending and control our entitlements as well. If I ask most of you, who do we owe most of our money to, most people would guess China. That's not true. This is our foreign debt here in dark blue. The light blue is the debt we owe to ourselves. So you can see, I'll move this here so you can see it. You can see that we owe most of the debt to ourselves and the debt that we owe to others. Here's the list. China is the most, followed by Japan, some offshore bankers, and some other countries there. So foreign entities own, probably about 32% of the entire debt. So we don't owe the most to China, we owe the most to ourselves. I'll pause there, Matt. Everybody doing okay? And I don't see any questions so far. Can you guys still hear me?
Can hear you loud and clear, sir. I don't see any questions in the question box either, but definitely encourage everyone, if you have questions, just to throw them up there, and we'll be sure to bring them to the Admiral's attention.
All right, we'll continue the picture parade here.
Hey, sir, if I may,
yeah.
I do have one question. As you talk about China, you know, some people see China, and they've obviously gone through a boom in the last decade or so, or perhaps more. What kind of challenges are they facing right now? Because, you know, you see on one side people say, oh, they're just running away with their economies growing, but then on the other side you see where they have some significant challenges as well.
Well, I'm one of the people that see, to your good point, China has more internal challenges than we do. About half of Washington, D.C. would like to paint them as a potential enemy someday because there's business involved with that. About half of Washington, D.C. would like to consider them a friend. And there's other business that you could do that's not military business. I think we need to have a strong defense to make sure we're prepared for whatever happens. But China's got 1.4 billion people, or maybe even more. 2/3 of them are peasants, and about 400 million, you know, live in cities, more in the coastal area. They've got a huge challenge with population right now because of, we call it 4-2-1. That's 4 grandparents, 2 parents, and 1 child. They had the one-child policy for many, many years, and it's really hitting them now. They've reversed themselves, and now their Social Security payments, their pensions are in far worse shape than ours as they live longer, and they just didn't have children. So by 2025, they're going to have less than 2 workers per recipient of benefits. We're a little better with about 3 workers for each person receiving benefits, but that's going to be a real internal challenge for them. We don't read about it because there's not a lot of holiday inns there, but in Western China, they fight terrorists and have problems every day just like we do. So there's a lot of areas of China that are not yet settled. They have that huge problem of making sure that large amount of oil comes through the Straits of Malacca. They're building some overland pipelines through Pakistan and Iran, which are friends. I think Iran's oil output, about 25% of it goes directly to China. So China has issues just in maintaining its own regional posture. If I were in that region, I'd pay attention to China, and I would try to trade with them. It's amazing how much trade between Australia and China goes on. But China also rewarded all their district managers if you would, for meeting certain growth goals, and the way they got to those goals, by my words, just writing down, pencil whipping that they were making those goals. And if you, over time, don't make your goals, but you're saying that you are making your goals, then you're going to collapse. And they're on the verge of a banking collapse because of the loans they've made, the growth they assumed, and the returns aren't there. So I greatly simplified what's going on about China. Matt, did that answer your question?
It did, sir. Thank you very much. Sorry, just timely unmute there, but yes, it did. Thank you.
Yeah. So we've got to be cautious. We need to trade with them. We need to partner with them. We need to do military exercises with them. You know, we want them to succeed. And if they do crash or have a recession or depression, it will impact us. Because not only do we buy their goods, they buy our goods as well. There'll be a global impact if China gets the financial flu. So
and sir, I think, if I may too, sir, I think you hit on one of the key points for people in the military too, is that, like you said, a lot of people view China as a trading partner, and then there's some people that view them as a potential military adversary too. So that's an interesting dynamic. But thanks again.
Yeah, and you know, we always talk about, to your point, about the Army's the smallest it's ever been, or the Navy's the smallest it's ever been, or we need more and more and more. Well, you saw from the budget slides, we don't have more money to spend. And what the people here in Washington try to do is say, okay, what are the threats? Is China a threat today? Well, it could be sometime, but is it a threat today? No, not really. Is Russia a threat today? Well, they can project power a little bit, but, you know, they forgot to have children too, and they got real problems, and, you know, and their economy's gone down 5% in the last year, and the prices of oil are really hurting their budgets. Because Putin assumed, you know, $90 to $100 a barrel to write his budget, and what is the price of oil right now? About $50 a barrel. So they're in the hole on that. So when you start looking at threats, and then what military we need to have to build, you know, secure us, and then you look at the real threats, probably homegrown, so it ends up being homeland security. And in the class when I was with Matt, talking to the folks at Joint Forces Staff College, I like to point out something that each of you needs to think about, and that's the difference between security and defense. And in my, you know, pilot mind, security is what you do before you're attacked, and defense is what you do after you're attacked. So the Department of Homeland Security has to think about our entire country and our borders and all the people here and all the agencies that support that, and think about how to coordinate it and get it to communicate. When you think about a town, how much trouble it has just having its fire department and its police department and its government talk to each other. I know on Capitol Hill here, there's about 38 different police departments. You can think about, as a nation, how we have to coordinate this and try to make it happen. So is the biggest threat we have probably homegrown? It is. In fact, in 2007, there was a big study done for about 18 months. And if you want to be afraid of something, they determined that the only things Americans have to be afraid of, because we have two great big oceans, two semi-friendly neighbors, we're displaced from a lot of chaos in the world, but we do or should worry about disease, and that's either human-borne disease or food-borne disease. And I should advance the slide here so you can look at America. And the other thing is terrorism. Like that chart showed before from the Council on Foreign Relations, our country's red now because of some homegrown terrorists who either sneaking in or getting radicalized online, like we saw the other day at Ohio State University, where the person crashed his car and got out of the car with a machete. So we could talk more about that in the Q&A afterwards, but the last few slides to stimulate and make you think a little bit. I showed you the one where the equal GDPs of our country. This is the largest employer by revenue in each of those states. So you look at your home states and where you're living right now or where you're from. It's kind of funny where Idaho is a grocery store, Albertsons. Of course, Oregon has to be Nike because it's so big. Some of them are insurance companies. Some of them are communications. Look at all the different brands that are up there, cars and gas, Walmart, and there's probably even, trying to think, a lot of energy companies do. So that's kind of curious. And then the next one always gets a lot of laughs out there. You know, we say we value lots of things, but I always say follow the money. So in states, cities, federal government, here are the highest paid public employees as of a couple of years ago in each of these states. So you can see what we really value. And it's a lot of football and basketball coaches and maybe a little plastic surgery. And I got to tell you, it's always a chuckle. Matt remembers this. The 3 highest Department of Defense employees pay and benefits are, of course, the 3 coaches of the military academy football teams. So that's always a chuckle when you think about that.
And sir, your alma mater appears to be the only one earning that salary this year.
I'm glad you said that, Matt. Go Navy, and they're doing well. In fact, I heard that they've messed up all the bowl picks, and most people are hoping that Navy loses on Saturday versus Temple, because then they can go ahead and make all the bowl picks. But if Navy wins, Navy's the only Army are the only ones that play a game the week after, which is the annual Army-Navy game. It usually didn't mean anything, but now it might, because Navy, if they win the next 2, would go to the Cotton Bowl, which hasn't happened since 1963 and Roger Staubach. And if that happens, then that would mess up the bowl picks, because they'd have to wait until the Army-Navy game. So I'll just give you a little background on football this weekend. Last slide of all, despite everything I said, I want to congratulate everyone that's listening, because you're in America, and probably most of you are Americans. We've already won the lottery by being here. We won. We've done great. You can see we've got the highest GDP. We're relatively safe. We sometimes take too long in the things that we decide to do. That's the most frustrating form of government, is a democracy, because it's very inefficient. But I think our good friend Winston Churchill here summed it up pretty well. It took him and FDR a long time to finally get America involved in the war, and when the big production machine of America got involved, we won the World War II. And since World War II, America's been kind of the world's policeman. I think we have to ask ourselves as American citizens, can we afford to keep being, you know, the world's policeman? I think President Obama tried to make us a little more of a country than the country. And I think President-elect Trump, his message that resonated was America first. So we got a lot of issues here, and maybe we shouldn't spend a lot of money on, I'll pick on NATO for, you know, NATO or some other organization where people maybe aren't paying their way. So that concludes my slides. I would now open it up to anyone that would like to ask a question or make a comment, or anybody that has the ability to chat, like Matt or Jeff or anybody else. You can ask a couple questions to stimulate the thinking, because I think I left about 15, 20 minutes here for discussion.
Sir, I'll open up with one just to get everyone thinking, and please, folks, please send your questions in the Q&A chat box. But while folks are thinking, you just mentioned President-elect Trump's plans to invest in America, America first. You know, SAME membership includes a great mix of engineers, architects, business professionals, all interested in supporting our national security. In your dealings in the private sector and around the DC area, are you hearing anything about his plans to invest significantly in U.S. infrastructure? And I guess a second question to that would, should we be concerned with how that would impact our national debt that you already raised as a significant issue?
Yeah, great question, Matt, and short answer, yes. I would say inside the Beltway, again, it's about 50-50 split. You know, half the people are surprised at the election results and are packing their bags and selling their houses and have to move away as the new folks move in. But I was talking to some of my friends in the Pentagon. There is a new optimism. I would say the same is going on in Congress and in the Senate, because at least for 2 years, the president will have a majority in both houses, can pass the budgets that he needs. In the last 8 years, we've run up our debt $9 trillion. We, the people, have done that. I don't think there were a lot of shovel-ready jobs. There were some promises to invest in infrastructure. Those weren't realized. In fact, in some cases, they were discouraged, particularly when it came to energy and moving the oil through pipelines. So I think the new folks coming in, the directions from the president-elect are to make this happen. I've heard, you know, if you go another $1 trillion in debt and you get $2 trillion in return in benefits, then it's a good investment. And businessmen look at return on investment, and if it's less than 6 years, they'll do it. That's usually the goal that people put in any project. So I think you're going to be hiring some businessmen to come in and run government like a business. I've worked a long time in the Navy, spent a lot of years in the Pentagon. I've done a lot of budgets. I am frustrated personally because we don't run things like a budget, because there's a word that always comes up, particularly when you talk to Congress, and that is NIMBY, N-I-M-B-Y, which is not in my backyard. Most congressmen will say it's okay to do anything in anybody else's district, but don't touch mine. For example, Matt, you're in the Air Force. We talked about this in class. It's estimated that 1/3 of the Air Force bases are not needed right now. We just don't have as many airplanes as we used to. Our bombs are much more accurate right now. We don't need to throw a bunch of them out there. We can accomplish the same with a smaller number of airplanes. And so maybe we should close some bases. We don't have to keep them open all the time. Our Army's gotten smaller. Maybe we need to close a few of those bases. We've got a lot of warehouses that we keep open just in case. Maybe we don't need them. Maybe there's some consolidation. Does every National Guard unit in every state need the same equipment that the state next door has? I know these are fighting words, but maybe we need to look at our country more regionalized, like kind of FEMA does. Maybe we should all align the same way. So you could look at these projects and say, over the course of 6 to 8 years, if someone took this on, you could get significant savings. And I think the new administration is going to say, let's maybe even have to borrow against those promises to take those costs down. I think in a business world, you could do it a lot faster because you can have layoffs. In the federal world, you've got to have a long-term budget to put those in. So I've already heard that they're asking to look at the FY18 budget a little longer. And the 17 budget, which right now is under a continuing resolution, might go on a little longer. So I think they're trying to make some quick impacts on the budget, Matt, to maybe start some of these projects, because we all know that our infrastructure and a lot of the engineers out there are going to benefit from this. So Matt, does that answer your question?
It does, sir. Yeah, and it sounds like either when you're talking about just straight up investments in our infrastructure, that's some opportunity for folks on the call, and as well as, you know, as they enable the DoD to make smart facility changes, consolidations, whatnot, that will entail other opportunities as well. So be interesting to see how it plays out. Definitely, as you highlighted, over the next couple of years when Congress will have Republican control as well.
And I think the greatest engine in this is going to be tax reform, both personal and business. And you heard the president-elect in the campaign talk about, you know, 3 levels of tax for individuals and to potentially cut the corporate tax from 35% to 15%. Every big business, little business person I talked to said, if you had your taxes halved, what would you do? And every one of them said, the first thing I would do is I'd deferred maintenance. I would fix my business. And I would not only give contracts to people to do that, but I would also hire a couple more people to improve business. And then I would start looking, if I have optimism, into expanding my businesses or buying other businesses or growing my business. So I would say overall there's some optimism going on, particularly if we can act quickly. Now, if you looked at the total revenues that the government gets, about 9% are corporate revenues. So if you took 9% of our revenues and reduced it by 50%, it's not a huge impact on the budget, and potentially the returns are gigantic, because if businesses got bigger, they would pay more taxes. If people had jobs, or people got better jobs, or people got paid more, they would pay more taxes. So supply side economics, much like John F. Kennedy preached, Ronald Reagan preached. I think people want to try that now because stagnation, what we've been through, wasn't working real well. So I'm pretty optimistic about stuff. And Matt, I don't see any questions there. I wanted to mention one more thing. I wanted to compliment everyone in the audience. I'm an engineer myself. Anybody that's technically oriented, congratulations. I've done a lot of recruiting in my life, a lot of travel around the country, and I tell the classes this, but if you take 100 eighth graders in the United States of America today, eighth graders, what percent, how many out of 100 are going to graduate from high school or get a GED? And unfortunately, the answer is 67, about 2/3. So we're losing a third that never get that high school education. Okay, of that 100,
sir,
go ahead, yeah.
No, go ahead, sir. Finish that thought, sorry.
Out of that 100 eighth graders, how many go on and graduate from a 4-year college institution, get a degree? And the answer is 18. 18 of them. Now, of the 18, this is really unfortunate because it's an imbalance. How many are men and how many are women? And the graduate degree can come later in life too, and many women are returning to the workforce after children and families. But the answer right now is 12 women and 6 men. So 2/3 of college degrees are going to women. Now some women will say, yahoo, okay, but it's an imbalance, and we'd rather have balance in our lives than have an imbalance. It also means a lot more women are going to be in the military, and women are going to be in their workforces, because men, you men out there, not you guys in the audience, but other men, are dumbing down. In our inner cities, 55% of our young men are dropping out of high school. A lot of people have, overgrown thumbs from video games, or they think they can be pro athletes, and they're not preparing themselves for the future. Probably most unfortunate out of all these numbers I just gave you, 18 college degrees. How many of them are technical? And the answer is 2. 2 out of the 18. So out of those 100 eighth graders, only 2 of them are going to get into a technical field. So then you have to ask, who's going to make things, who's going to invent things, who's going to fix things? So the answer is we have to find out a way to attract smart people from overseas and come to our country. And then you look at our crazy immigration system, and we limit the amount of smart ones that come in to about 70,000 a year, and we don't limit the other ones that come in that, want to try to work themselves up. So we've got some work to do, not only in our own school systems, and I think that's why Betsy DeVos was appointed as Secretary of Education to maybe put some pressure on public schools and emphasize charter schools. But anyway, look at our whole education system because it needs attention. We pay more than any other country per student, and our results aren't as good. There's other reasons for that too, including the families. And some of the other key appointees, I think, will help work on that too, particularly Homeland Security, and once we review our immigration system, how we're going to vet people coming in, because we need to have good people come into our country. That's the strength and the background of our country over all these years. Okay, Matt, anything else? Oh,
sir,
questions came up?
Absolutely, sir. I've discovered some additional questions in the Q&A block. Sorry for the technical difficulty on that. Lots of good questions. If we can buzz through some of these as well. A couple people asked about what does debt to ourselves mean, so if it's possible to touch on that. There's also people were asking about, regarding the infrastructure improvements, do you think it's going to be more focused on security, like securing ports and hardening against threats, or on improvements, replacement of structure suffering from degradation like roads, bridges, et cetera?
Mm-hmm. First things I would say, I think we're going to fix degradation. Securing ports and some big things like that, well, I think it's going to be more up to state and local to do that. But I think when we're talking about railroads, airports, bridges, a lot of that infrastructure has been ignored. A lot of states can't afford to do it. If you look at, some people are starting to compare President-elect Trump's time in office to General Eisenhower. And if you remember, Eisenhower was very suspicious of the military-industrial complex. And he never got us involved in war. He hesitated doing that. But some people say the greatest accomplishment of Eisenhower's administration was, if you'll remember, was, some people say space race, but it really was the interstate highway system. And that was started, and gosh, they're still working on it, but that's probably the biggest thing we did. In fact, when Khrushchev visited our country in the early 60s and drove around, he said, we will never conquer you because of your interstate highway system. No other nation has something like this, the size and the magnitude that we do. So if you think about that, you know, we take that kind of national effort on our infrastructure, it would really improve us for many, many, many more years. I recommend a book for you all to read. I just thought it popped into my head. I told Matt's class the same thing. Probably one of the better books I've read in the last 5 years, and I've always got 1 or 2 books going and one in the car and book on CD. But it's called The President's Club. The President's Club. It's by Gibbs and Duffy. You can Amazon it real quick. The audio CD is really easy to listen to. Audible books. And it starts with Truman, and every chapter is a president through Obama. And it is when that president took their first security brief and went to their desk at 8:30 in the morning on January 21st, had a blank desk and had a phone, who did they call? Who were their mentors? Well, one of the first people Truman called was Herbert Hoover, who FDR hated, and needed Hoover to help with the European food crisis post-World War II, because he had the same kind of food crisis in our country during the Depression. Eisenhower built the Bay of Pigs plan, but Kennedy poorly executed. Bill Clinton most nights called Dick Nixon for international guidance about Russia and China. The first person that Obama called for mentoring advice was George Herbert Walker Bush. Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter were united in their hatred of Ronald Reagan for lots of reasons. So the President's Club, particularly after an election, and you see how it all lines up, it really is an easy read. I didn't want it to end. Every chapter is a president and kind of the inner workings of what goes on. And you realize it really is a club and how they run things. Now, I think, debt to ourselves. Okay, so if you have a MasterCard and you spend an extra $100 and you can't pay it off, you pay the minimum and then you get an interest charge. Well, that's what we're doing now. We're paying an interest charge and we sell that debt in T-bills, and that debt just keeps accumulating. And right now, about, I'd say 7 or 8% of our budget, and you saw that one slide says it might grow up to 11%, is spent just on interest. And if we didn't pay that interest, if we paid our bills, we would have that much more money to spend. In fact, if we had no interest, we could fund these programs across the country to fix the infrastructure just with internal cash. If you look at the history of our ability to spend, you know, back in the 60s and 70s when we were building infrastructure, we had a lot more discretionary spending. We have a lot less now because our population is graying a little bit and people are living a lot longer and they want their services. So we either change the way we approach that, change the services, or we just do less with the amount of money we have, or do we stimulate growth and therefore get more revenues and increase the top line? I think that's what the President-elect and his team are going to try to do. So, Matt, did I answer that question?
Absolutely, sir. And if you have time for another question, and again, sorry to the folks that were typing these in, I missed some in the windows. A couple questions related to public-private partnerships. You know, with the need for infrastructure improvements and the decreasing amount of discretionary funds, how much emphasis should be placed on those public-private partnerships, and do you have any thoughts on how that will be used by the new administration?
Yeah, I personally think it's the only way to get something started is public-private, because particularly in the public sector, we have all kinds of great ideas, but until you have some money, you can't get going. And so, you know, the money has to come first, or the promise of the money. So that's where the federal government's got to seed these programs. Unfortunately, what seems like a great idea today, 10, 12, 15 years from now, may not be a real good idea, and that public-private partnership may not pan out. A great example I know of is I was based in New Orleans for a while at Naval Air Station. They had a public-private base housing. They built some really nice houses for the base people, and if they weren't full or the base population got smaller, they would backfill the homes with civilians, you know, who would now have to get through a gate to get to their house. And of course, as more people moved on base that weren't military members, guess what happens? The crime rate goes up, other kind of things go up. You get some undesirables on base you didn't have before, so nobody really thought about that kind of thing in a public-private partnership. That's just one example of something that didn't turn out like was planned, but I personally think that's the only way to go with it. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, sir. And if you'll entertain just one final question, it ties into your service in the Navy and as a flag officer in the Navy. Several people have asked about, you know, during the campaign and recently, there's a lot of talk about transparency with regard to military operations overseas. You know, some people think we might be showing our hand too much or telling what we're going to do before we do it, as opposed to just doing it and then telling about it afterwards. So from your military experience, where do you think you find that balance on transparency with the American people, but needing to maintain some level of operational security, operational quiet, if you will, to get the job done? And on the additional side of that, President-elect Trump is entertaining several retired generals into his administration. Do you have any thoughts on that, whether good, bad, or indifferent of having such a retired general officer presence in administration?
I'll take the second one first. It'll surprise you, I'll say this, but I personally would be against appointing generals into those positions. It's very clear that civilians run our government and the military reports to the civilians, and that might be a built-in safety guard to make sure we don't rush into things. Now, if you want things done quickly, I can see why President-elect Trump might want to put some key people in there that are very mission-focused despite, you know, what else is going on. One of the campaign slogans was draining the swamp. You might need some mission-focused people to come in here and clean things up and get things running like they used to. That'd be pretty drastic, but the federal government doesn't move very fast, and it takes 2 years for a budget to get through, so you can wish for all this fast movement, but I think the actuality of the government budget cycles is going to slow things down. So my point is, a former senator like Jim Talent's being considered for SecDef. What you really need is someone that knows the building, gets the programs, understands the strategies, and then goes across to the congressmen and senators and explains what reality is to get the budgets done on time and the funds going into the right places for the greater good. So sometimes the politicians working on the other side of the river in the Department of Defense, like we've had in the past, sometimes are more successful with the budgets. With Homeland Security, putting a general in there like John Kelly, I've heard, who was former of the Southern Command. He really knows the AOR. If you want to secure the border quick and do it with military, I can see you want to put him in there. But for the long term and for the budgets, again, you'll be a key civilian. I've heard Mike McCall's name is leading the list. He's coming out of the House, was on the Homeland Security Committee, and even the current Jay Johnson, I read in the paper today, has endorsed Mike McCall as his follow-on. So that would happen. And let's see, transparency. I had a chuckle when you said that, because what is transparent anymore? Because if you're online, someone's looking at it. An email lasts forever. You got WikiLeaks. The insiders leak things. That'll always happen. And also, everybody's a reporter now because they've got a cell phone. So we used to sit in the Pentagon and look at classified operations going on, and if we knew what really was going on, and we were watching all 4 major news channels and saw what they were saying was going on, if we actually knew something better than they did, we thought we were pretty good, because most of the time, the on-the-site people were covering it better than our military intelligence could. So I think we have a lot of transparency now, and the really good secrets are kept pretty darn well. And more, if I was there in front of the audience now, I'd be using my hands, but my whole life we had large Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and we were supported by agencies and CIA and special operations, and now most of the operations we have in the world are more special operations in CIA and agencies, and they're supported by this great big thing called the military, which does more of the transport, logistics, security, because we have no peer competitor, we have no one trying to beat us. So our military today is much more, Matt, you know this, much more versatile, has to do many more things. And the military person today, a Marine taught me this, the real question is when not to pull the trigger. The real question is when to come off the trigger, because you switch quickly from warfare mode to cleanup mode to fix, because we take care of things so quickly, we need to rebuild things. So much more of our effort needs to be put on the first phase of war, which is negotiating and talking and making sure war never happens, and a lot more on the fixing and building thing rather than the kinetic. I call it warheads on foreheads. We're real good at that, but we shouldn't rush to do that. We should rush, I personally think, to more of the other two, the talking, the settling, business opportunities, and I think that's where President-elect Trump is. And one more thing I'll add, I know we're running out of time, and I'd use my hands here if I could, but we've learned in Congress, if you have less experience in the military of Congress, and now it's less than 20%, you actually have more of a propensity to go to war faster. But if you have more veterans in Congress, because they now all know how horrible war is, you have less of a propensity to go to war, if that makes sense. But historically, that's what we've seen. And I see a lot more military and guardsmen and reservists who've been mobilized in the last 15 years now running for office. You have a few more veterans that are coming into office now, which I think is a good thing. Matt?
Sir, outstanding. Thank you very much. There are a few other questions, and if it's okay with you, sir, if folks would like to get connected offline, would that be okay to provide your information?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, my first slide has my email address, jgcotton@gmail. If you'd like to ask the questions, I'll answer it. I can stay online if you need to. And also, if you want to send me your email address, a couple times a month I'll send out a good think piece article that DC's reading that's causing changes. I can add you to that distribution list. I say the greatest freedom of speech is the delete key. If you don't want to read it, just delete it. But if you want to be able to have it, print it out, take it to your know-it-all teenagers, you can do that too. So I'm available for any more that you have, Matt. Otherwise, thanks very much for the opportunity to talk to everybody. And most of all, be thankful we're Americans. We've got a great country. I'm optimistic. Our best days are ahead of us, and we're doing extremely well.
Sir, I think that's an outstanding way to wrap it up, and we just really appreciate your time and all your insights today. You know, I failed to mention in the introduction, but to the callers, when we approached Admiral Cotton about participating on one of these calls, he happily agreed, and he said, we owe it to our future leaders to communicate and educate to better prepare them for the challenges of tomorrow. So, sir, you've led such an impressive life and career of leadership, service, and mentorship, and we just really appreciate you taking the time to help prepare these young engineers, architects, and business professionals for those challenges of tomorrow. So thanks again. Thanks, everyone, for being on the call and for your thoughtful questions. I hope I got to most of them once I realized they were all there. But again, as Admiral Cotton mentioned, feel free to connect with us offline. We'll make the slides available as well, so you can use these or review them again later. So Admiral Cotton, thanks again. Thanks again to Madhu Carey and Jeff DeGuide for putting this together, and thanks for joining us.